I'm Paul. I look after the Showaddywaddy website, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Dave Bartram again for a chat. So nice to see you again, Dave. Are you keeping
Uh,
well?
Good to see you. I'm in good nick, thank you, and nice to be chatting to everyone again. I can give a few interesting replies to your questions.
Yes, good. Well, I've got plenty of those. Um, so yeah, last time we discussed the band's formation and sort of first year as a professional outfit.
Yeah.
But I thought today we'd discuss the 1975-76 period. So the band was
Mhm.
sort of really starting to bed in at that point
Yeah,
and
yeah.
sort of going nice and steady. And then things sort of really exploded then in December 76 with obviously hitting the number one spot.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, at the beginning of 75, a normal year really. Your band started off with a run of gigs at Bailey's, and you had Sheffield City Hall, Newcastle City Hall. But later in the month, you actually played at the Midm Festival in Cannes,
Midem in
Midem.
France. Yeah, yeah.
So that was an international music publishers event, I think. But I wonder if you can tell us a bit about what that was about.
Yeah, Midem's a huge event that is still running to this day. In actual fact, I was there. I was over there. Oh, crikey! About 10 years ago, I think the last time, doing basically it's a load of stands and every record company in the universe is represented there, and a lot of business gets done there actually, but also on the fun side, a lot of socializing as well, uh, which was pretty good. But yeah, I've been out there a few times. When we got our catalogue back, that was a long drawn out piece of business. But the I think actually just linking up with everyone at the Midem Festival was kind of the icing on the cake, as we could all sort of shoot from the hip, and we got the deal done, which was brilliant. But harking back to early 1975, obviously the band was still very much in its infancy, and and we found ourselves out there, and there was some amazing stars. I mean, we were walking along the pavement with Elton John at one point, and Leo Sayer was very kind. The band did a performance, and Leo was really impressed with the band, and yeah, it was great to rub shoulders with with some of our contemporaries. But also, interestingly, one of the bands on one night was a band that we'd often been accused of sort of kind of nicking their sort of image, if you like, which was Sha Na,
Yes.
and uh, and we watched them play one night and realised just how different both bands were. Although they were great, but they were very much sort of, it's very tongue in cheek. It wasn't so much about making records with Shannon or it was all about the performance, and I think they toured extensively all over the world. And but it was great working with them and chatting to them and swapping notes, if you like.
Yeah, I seem to recall that they did songs perhaps in the original 50s style, whereas Showaddywaddy at the time were doing them in a more modern style of the era.
That's right. Yeah,
Is what
we took a lot of sort of old songs. Obviously, we wrote our own songs as well, which made us very different to Shannon R.
Mm.
But as you quite correctly say, Shannon R. It was about recreating the sound of the 50s, whereas we were very much swept into the, well, you probably call it the glam rock, the back end of the glam rock era,
Yes.
and which played into our hands really, because the kind of the glittery clothes and things had probably just about had its day, and here was us, like I think we were once described as an explosion in a paint factory,
Yeah.
all the colours and very fast moving, energetic show, and I think that really was what the public embraced. They just loved the performance side of things, and obviously to have a load of hits as well, was really the icing on the cake.
Mm. So you mentioned writing your own songs. And in February 75, the first single of the year was Sweet Music. And
Indeed.
that came from your own pen, your own hand,
It
I
came from
believe.
my own pen. Yeah, yeah. I wanted the band at that time. I wanted us to be a little bit more aggressive.
Mm.
Uh, it was very like I said before. It was about the live performance, and we wanted some sort of almost anthemic songs. It's kind of in the vein of hey rock and roll, just to really whip the audiences into a frenzy, and that was the whole idea behind Sweet Music.
Yeah.
Although, although critically, I will say it probably sounds a bit sort of maybe overcritical, but we went over to Germany while the song was being mixed rather than being in house. And when we heard we were really excited about this single. But when we heard the final mix, I have to say we were extraordinarily disappointed because it had all been very much compressed and made to sound almost like a glam rock single. But I remember when we finished recording it and listening back to it, yeah, the harmonies were really big on it, and it really rocked. So it was a little bit of a disappointment, that one. It didn't
Yeah.
quite bring the production didn't quite bring the best out in that song, but it still became very much a favourite on the road.
Yes, it's interesting to hear you describe the final result of the song like that because to me it sounds like quite a heavy song, and like I say, it's got that kind of anthemic feel
Yeah,
to it.
yeah.
So it's interesting to hear you say that the version you thought you might get was perhaps heavier still.
Um, Perhaps, yeah, a little bit heavier still, but the harmonies were
Ah,
really,
okay.
really big. They were massive, and I thought that really brought the best out in the song.
Mm,
But at that time, Mike Hurst was in the producer's chair, and we were away on tour in Germany, and the result was not quite what we wanted, and
no.
but I mean, it sold a lot of copies, and
Yes.
which wasn't really, I think, got to number 14 in the charts, and I know there were quite a number of records at that time in the chart that hadn't sold anywhere near what Sweet Music had. So
Mm,
again, it sounds a little bit like sour grapes, but I think a lot of our followers, it was never really representative of actually how many records we'd sold because
no.
we would sell records in the south of England. We'd sell, quite good quantities, but in the north of England, it's like everybody couldn't wait for the next release, and the first 2 or 3 weeks sales were colossal, which was just amazing.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So I wonder, as a songwriter, I wonder if you can tell me sort of, if you have a blank sheet of paper in front of you, and every songwriter will have different techniques, I guess. But what was your approach for songwriting? So did you perhaps have an idea or a lyric that you developed first, or did you have maybe a riff and no words to go with it? So how did you go about writing songs?
It's a weird thing, and I still get it to this very day. I'm just sort of, I don't know, pottering around doing whatever out in the garden, mowing the lawn, you know, whatever, and a song just, I don't know, just comes into my head, and it always has. Always picking up sort of little lines, either lyrically or even melodically, and it would all sort of really branch from just an original idea. But with songs like Sweet Music, as I say, I was thinking more of the stage show,
Mm,
and the performance side, rather than just writing and actually a really sort of great song. It I just wanted something that would excite the public
mm.
and something a little bit more raw and
Yes.
which perhaps wasn't represented in the final mix.
Yeah. So I was just wanted to ask you as well about the recording process. So when you were in the studio, did the band say play live, or did you layer different elements of the track down? So the drums first, and then the guitars, and then the vocals. How did you actually do it in the studio?
Normally we would start off in those days. Obviously, the techniques weren't anywhere near as sophisticated as they are now. But we would start off by just getting in the studio and playing the track through a few times,
Mm.
yeah, as a band,
Yeah.
just to get that sort of
Warm up and feeling. Yeah.
the vibe just happening. Yeah, yeah. And you know, we'd run it a few times, but although with sweet music, I wasn't too keen to run it too many times
Quite
because
high, isn't it? Quite hard to
you know,
sing, I guess.
very unbelievably high key. Yeah. And you know, I think I had to wear tight underwear to get some of those notes. But yeah, we'd run it a few times, and basically, when we were kind of comfortable with the arrangement, um, we put Romeo or Malcolm would go in and we'd see who was sort of playing it, sort of the more solid sort of style, and which was Romeo on that track, and we just take it from there really, and generally the bass would play along with the drums, and I would be kind of doing what was called a guide vocal or a vocal
Yeah.
over it, so that they kind of knew where they were in the song. So
Yeah.
and then it would just build from there. We would then put guitar on and get the basic bass line on, and then you've got the basics of the track then, and then we'd start doing the layering process, with various harmonies or added guitars and or other little things. I mean, we've used. I remember using a theremin once on one of our tracks.
I'll have to
But
Google
yeah,
that.
it was great to have a bit of time in the studio and the budget to experiment a little bit as well. So you could kind of just deviate from the norm.
Mm. So one thing about obviously the eight members of the original lineup, the musicians and even yourself and Bill as vocalists all had different styles. So if you take the bass, for example, Rod played primarily with his fingers, Jeff played with a pick. So did it not become apparent until you sort of laid down the demo as to say which musicians were best suited to a track?
But we'd always rehearse the song first before we went
Yeah.
into the studio because you can waste an awful amount of
Yeah.
time, and in the studio, time is money.
Yeah.
So we would rehearse the track first, and as you say, the particular style, and I think that was Jeff on Sweet Music. It was more
Yeah.
of a plodding sort of pick type thing, with a quite a heavy bass line, but. And yeah, it was horses for courses, really. Although there were two or three members of the band that didn't enjoy being in the studio and weren't really part of the recording process for many years.
Mm.
But that would all be sorted out in the rehearsal. So we would take the bodies into the studio that were needed to complete the track.
Yes. So no, that's interesting. No, thank you for that. So the B side to Sweet Music was a song called Windows, and
Yeah.
I remember you telling me once that that was the only track that Bill Gask had a hand in writing, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, we were trying to encourage everybody to write because it was kind of a little bit unfair that Trevor and myself were writing all the songs,
Mhm.
and the publishing was actually divided between all eight members, which to a degree still leaves a sort of bitter taste in the mouth. But yeah, that song Bill played this kind of little demo that he recorded, and it wasn't very good. I have to say, it really wasn't very good. And I said to him, "I'll take it away." There was this little clavinet in the studio. It was the only keyboard that was there, and I sat down and I started picking out these chords, which it's a very basic chord formation, and came up with the ding 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 the on the clavinet, and I thought, that sounds really quite good, and so rather than being like a G E minor C D sort of thing, it kind of developed more into a more ballady type type
Mm.
thing rather than a more upbeat song. And as it was slowed down and became a bit more romantic, it started to come together. And then we put some harmonies onto it, and it was quite a pretty little song at the end.
Mm. You actually preempted one of my questions. I was going to ask what the instrument was, the sort of like a xylophone type sound, isn't it?
It was a clavinet, yeah,
Clarinet.
that's
Very
right.
good.
Yeah.
No,
And
that's
there is
good.
actually, if you listen closely to it, there is actually a bum note
Oh, is
uh,
it?
towards the end of it. Yes,
Right.
I think I just clipped a note when I was playing the C chord. I think I clipped it here as well. But we thought now the feel was there. So in those days, a lot of things weren't perfect because
Right.
you couldn't spend too much time, and our management at the time didn't want us to spend too much time in the studio because we weren't out earning when we
Yeah.
were in the studio. So it's quite a callous business at times.
That leads me on to one of my other questions, actually, because the band were out on the road 6, 7 days a week, couple of days of, a couple
Constantly.
of days rest in between, and that almost has continued through the band's career, sort of constantly being on the road. So was it intentional from day one, really, that the band was going to be out constantly, as opposed to doing a tour and then a break for a few weeks and
It's
then another
strange you should
tour?
ask that. Yeah, it's strange you should ask that question because I can remember around about 78 when the band were flying, the band's songs were being played constantly on the radio. We were having massive hits all over Europe. There was even a demand for us to go out to Japan and Australia, which never happened, largely for financial reasons. But in those days, it wasn't the age of the video, so to like conquer a country, if you like, you'd have to go out there and do a tour,
Mm.
play a number of dates, and then you would develop a huge following, sort of wherever you went. Um, but no, we were kept, I think, just far too busy.
Mm.
And we actually did sit down towards the end of 78. And I remember saying, look, all the other big bands, all the other top artists aren't just touring constantly. They're not playing nightclubs and then going into a theatre, then doing, a run of 10 sort of dates in what holiday camps or wherever. I said, we need to up our game, and we need to take ourselves into bigger venues and do less gigs and sort of create a bit more magic, if you like, sort of not be so available.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the idea was poo-pooed, and we just stayed on the road touring constantly. And here we are, sort of 50 years later.
Yeah.
The band is still out there touring.
Still out there.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, as the sort of spring of 75, or perhaps towards the summer, Three Steps to Heaven was the second single of the year. And that
yeah,
was actually the first cover version
it
the
was.
actually released as a single.
Yeah, yeah. We were recording the second album, Step Two, and we didn't know it was to be called Step Two at the time, but
Hmm.
that kind of became sort of pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But we'd always put two or three or maybe more covers um, on each album that we recorded,
Mm.
and Three Steps to Heaven uh, was decided upon, and that we would record that as a tribute to Eddie Cochran.
Mm.
And As we were recording it, we could feel sort of, it was taking shape, and had something about it, had a bit of magic about it. And we took it to the record company, and they immediately said that's the single. And So that's we kind of the record company, um, that they sort of had first dibs on, what would be the single, and Three Step Seven was released, and it was a good version, and obviously it stormed up the charts and went to number one in the NME chart and the Melody Maker chart, but not in the official Gallup chart at the time. So, and I
Right.
think we were kept off number one which still rankles a little bit by Windsor Davis and Donna Stell.
Yeah, I seem to remember the band had a number of um, hits that were kept off number one by novelty type
My
records.
freak singles, yeah,
Between
the
half a
floaters,
dozen
I
like
think
that,
was another
maybe.
one, the streak, and yeah, there's a few, but they're not really tales of woe, a number two single, selling, and we sold like nearly 500,000 of every single we recorded, which was unbelievable.
Mm.
Um, but number two was fine, really.
Yeah.
Um,
So I was going to ask you about the B side to that single because that was The Party, which was actually already released on the
on the
debut
album,
album the year before. But the reason for it being the B side was because you played that song in a film that the band featured in,
we did a
Free
film
for
called
All.
Free for All. We recorded at a theatre in Brighton.
Top rank suite, apparently.
Sorry.
It was the top rank suite
Oh,
night.
what was the top rank? All right,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have remembered that, but I
Yeah.
do remember it's a large venue in Brighton. I mean, it was great to take part in a film, although there were no speaking parts. They'd mentioned when they asked about the track, they said that there'd be a couple of speaking parts for a couple of the band, but they never materialised. So we just basically turned up one afternoon, shot it 3 or 4 times, and that was our movie debut out the
Yeah.
way.
That's good. And then obviously you mentioned Step Two a moment ago. 12 tracks on that song and three
Yeah,
cover versions. But one thing I noticed about that album is that the sound of the band is sort of starting to develop a lot more.
yeah,
Like, for example, a saxophone was started to be introduced on Step Two, where it wasn't on
yeah,
the debut album. And
yeah.
so that's when was it Jeff Daly, the sax player, who you had
Yeah,
on
indeed.
board?
Jeff, still keep in touch with him to this
Yeah,
day. Yeah, Jeff was an amazing sax player, hell of a nice guy. And we actually did offer him a job with the band
yeah.
to become the ninth member. So at one point, um, but he was very, very busy with his session work, and but eventually went on the road, and he was in George Michael's band at one point.
All
So
right, okay.
great pedigree, but hell of a sax player.
Yes. And also on the album, Step Two, the songs are quite varied on the album, and there's a few sort of ballad type songs, if you like.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that just shows that Showaddywaddy weren't, sort of doing the raucous anthemic songs. You had perhaps a softer side to you. Um,
yeah, yeah.
obviously,
I think that to a
yeah,
degree that was demonstrated on the first album, but
yes,
the first album was a much lower budget. It was our first album, and at that time, there was this strange situation where you'd got singles bands and you'd got album bands,
mm,
and it was kind of, I don't know, it's like the holy grail to the albums bands. We have more respect because we make albums and we're an albums band, and we don't really want to release singles, but we just wanted to record our songs. Trevor and I were, well, crikey, we were writing loads and loads of stuff. We were prolific at that time, and we'd always swap notes and add bits to each other's songs, and it was really developing as a songwriting team. And it was almost a shame when that kind of was shot down as we went on to record more and more sort of covers. But again, that sounds a little bit like sour grapes, but every musician wants to develop, and when you're a songwriter, the more songs you write, and the more myself and Trevor's understanding, of working with someone else was beginning to, I don't know, show a more maturity, if you like,
mm.
and we always said we wanted to be the new Lennon and McCartney, and it never happened.
And Jeff Betts was writing the odd song as well. So
Yeah,
Rockaboots
Jeff.
was a song on that
Yeah,
album.
Jeff could write the odd song. Yeah, I think he was another one. He wrote songs just once in a while, and would kind of write them pretty quickly. He didn't really, Jeff is a very decent musician, and he just liked to contribute the odd song, and there were a couple of really decent tracks.
Yeah, indeed. So in August 75, I don't know if you remember this, the band were due to do a tour of Ireland, but it was actually cancelled at short notice due to the Miami show band
Yes,
killings.
yeah.
So do you remember anything about that particular event or that time?
Well, obviously, we were due to go over there. I mean, we had reservations because the IRA
Mm.
were very active at that time, and it was a concern because you know apart from forget the politics, they were trying just to get the headlines, and sadly, it was the Miami show band who I think a couple of their members were very anti-IRA and very vociferous, in their criticism of the IRA, and sadly, they it was absolutely shocking what happened in
Yeah.
the venue, and yeah, I mean it's very 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 sad time, but no, we decided to pass on the tour. It just wasn't really safe enough, and we were pretty big at the time, and who knows what might have happened if we'd undertaken to do the tour. But we did actually go back. I think a year later,
Yeah.
and we played at the Queen's University in Belfast, and we did another gig in Dublin, and I mean the Irish fans were incredible. They knew every word of every song, bit like the Scots. They always used to belt out the lyrics to every song, not as reserved as the English, but yeah, we went over there, and I'll never forget kind of being whizzed around in helicopters onto the tops of buildings and taking down fire escapes, so nobody could get near us. It was quite incredible.
Yeah. So around the same time, actually, August 75, the next single was Heartbeats. So that was quite a similar style to Three Steps to Heaven.
Yeah.
Obviously another cover version, but Bill Gascon lead vocals on this occasion, but gave you another top 10 hit.
Yes, it gave us another top 10. It was another song. Again, we were kind of recording it more as an album track. And I kind of took the thing away and came up with a sort of the bada sort of idea, just to try to make it different to the original, which, I've always been of the mind that if you're doing a cover, you've got to put your own stamp on it. You can't just really copy a song, and it really rankled with me. There were a couple of songs that we recorded a little later on that were kind of direct copies, and I never kind of got much satisfaction out of that. It just wasn't about being creative when you copy. So, but no, Heartbeat did was a great success. I think it got to number 7 in the chart, and again sold about 300,000 copies. So no complaints there.
But interestingly, in 75, you actually released 4 singles. So that normally it was 3 per year, but in 75 there was 4. The last one being Heavenly.
Yeah,
So that was obviously a song written by yourself, your good self, I
yeah,
believe.
yeah.
But interesting on this one, I believe the band or somebody in the band's perhaps staff declined a Top of the Pops appearance, and obviously that led to the single not perhaps being as successful as it might have been.
Yeah, sort of sitting in the managerial chair as I have done for crikey 40 years now. Yeah, I mean that was just a diabolical decision to make. Um, we were taken over to Belgium to perform on the Belgian National Lottery show, as opposed to doing the top of the pops. And consequently, we didn't do top of the pops. The single had just gone in sort of the nether regions of the chart, and we didn't do top of the pops, and it dropped.
Mm.
So the kind of the complacency of thinking, well, we can always do top of the pops next week, didn't kick in on that occasion. And the song, which was a really really decent record, that I think the production on that record was really really alive, and it kind of showed that the band really could write a half decent songs and perform, and it had that Eddie Cochran-esque sort of guitar, and I thought that was a really really good single, but yeah, it dropped due to catastrophic decision by our management at the time, and yeah, it's
It's a song.
unfortunately.
It's a song that's still the band sort of done throughout the career, really. From
Yeah, the band still play it. It's a very popular song, and people still like it. Again, a very high pitched one as well, but yeah, it's still very very popular, and it still goes down a storm, to this day. But yeah, I mean, there's always bad decisions. You can't get everything right. In 50 years of a band, you really can't. But to knock back a top of the post performance was suicide.
yeah. So into '76, then
Yeah,
the first single was Trocadero in
yeah.
'76. So I was interested to hear you say recently that you thought that was more of an album track. That's actually one of my favorite Showaddywaddy songs. Yeah, but you were not overly keen on it as a single.
Um, I'm not so sure. No, as it came together,
Mm.
and we actually did do some experimentation on that track. We used some looped voices, and got very very creative. Obviously, we got a bigger budget because we'd had so many hits, and there was more of a budget in the studio, so I had a bit more time to sort of try things out. And I never quite thought Trocadero. I thought it was a great song, and it kind of was a collaboration again between Trevor and myself. Trevor came up with the idea, and then we kicked ideas around, and we took the ventures, the walk don't run sort
That's
of
right. Yeah.
yeah, and stuck that in the middle, and it was great, because we were being creative, and I really really enjoyed that. I think my only sort of inhibition, if you like, was that it wasn't quite commercial enough.
Mm.
There was nothing really, certainly nothing anthemic about that song, but it was the kind of song that we were happy to put it out as a single because I think it showed that the band sort of could be a little more creative than perhaps we had been in the past.
Yeah. And yourself and Bill on lead vocals on that one together. And actually, there's not really that many songs in Showaddywaddy's back catalogue where you did sort of joint lead vocals.
Duets, no, no,
Probably.
no. The two voices work quite well. There are a lot of guitars on that, and as well. And as I say, the Ventures thing in the middle. It yeah, it was a very very good track. But
Mm.
I thought there may be it was a decent album, Trocadero, and it was perhaps our most creative. We were at our most creative during the making of that album. There were several, good tracks on that album that could easily have been singles.
Mm. So there was a B-side to the single that wasn't on the album called Teenage Love Affair.
Love Affair.
Yes, that's one. And I believe you
Well, there's
actually
a
wrote,
story behind that.
yeah, the Basic Rollers. Is
No,
it?
no, no,
Ah,
no. No. Trevor and I kind of came up with the idea for that song, but we were actually trying to write a song for Eurovision.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and that was a much better song than our recording was. It was done in a real hurry. It was a song that we hadn't recorded, and we needed a B side, and I think we just rushed it, did it in about half a day, and it shows, to be honest. But the actual song, um, was quite a commercial track. But yeah, we tried to go back to it, but there was not much enthusiasm for the rest of the band to re-record a song that we'd already recorded and been stuck on a B-side. So I think that one had a bit of unfair treatment, but
Yeah,
it was a better song than the way it was reproduced
yeah,
in that actual recording.
yeah. No, I like that one. It's good. So yeah, the Trocadero album, it was a bit of a bigger package than the previous album because you had the gatefold sleeve. You might
Yeah, yeah.
recall with the artwork in the center of the band, sort of outside the Trocadero, I believe.
Yeah, obviously the Trocadero in Leicester, I think, was knocked down in 1975, and I think that was what inspired us to do a sort of tribute uh, song to the Troc, which was a major venue in Leicester for many years. In actual fact, I saw the Rolling Stones there when I think I was only about 11, but yeah, it was a great venue. It's now a petrol station and has been for many years.
Yeah. So this the summer of '76 is well known as being one of the hottest summers on record, and
It was.
yeah. So you may recall in July '76 the band played a live special on LWT called Super Pop. I don't know if
Uh-huh.
you remember that. And there was a band who featured on the show called Mr. Big, and they actually
Yeah,
did a support slot with you around that time.
they did. Yeah.
But they also played with on tour with Queen and the Sweet as well.
They were a very good band. They really good performers, and they had a few decent songs. But I don't think that they got the breaks.
Yeah,
Um, which is a shame. There's a lot of artists. There was another band that toured with us quite extensively called Light Fantastic as well,
yeah,
and they were great performers. One of them kind of went on. The frontman went on to be a moderately successful comedian. But yeah, some bands just, I don't know, they just don't have the luck, if you like, get the breaks. But that said, you've got to be out there constantly to make sure you're there when the breaks do come along.
yeah. Especially in the pre-internet days, as we mentioned last
Oh
time.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's such a different world for music now. The internet's completely changed everything, and
mm,
as I suppose has digital technology. To some for the better, some for the worse.
yeah. So also in the summer of '76, that was when the band went into the studio to record "Under the Moon of Love."
Yeah,
So that
indeed.
was quite different to a lot of the songs you'd released previously, and I believe that song was introduced to the band by the Leicester DJ. Was it Mike Stacey? Mick Stacey?
Mick Stacey, yeah, yeah, it was indeed. We the record company kind of leaning on us, and there'd been a couple of singles that hadn't been as successful as we'd hoped, and it was kind of time to, I suppose, climb on the sort of oldie bandwagon, if you like, and do some more covers. But we went along. We had a band meeting, and we'd been given this recording, which was on a cassette of about 40 songs by the local DJ Mick Stacey, and oh, there's just some amazing. We all sat down and listened to these songs, and there were a number of them that leapt out. And I think there were four songs from that came out of that meeting that we recorded. Of course, the first thing was "Under the Moon of Love," which had never been a hit in the UK. It was a great song. As soon as you heard it, you thought, "Oh yeah, yeah, let's do that."
Mm.
And consequently, we were in the studio a couple of weeks later recording it, and that was the first time we met the sax player Jeff Daly, who blew his socks off on that song, and great brass section, and the whole vibe was brilliant. Although it got a bit out of hand at one time because the first take we had all these party noises going on in the background, and we could hear a dog barking. So we had to go back in and do another mix of it, and without the dog. But yeah, you could feel in your bones that that song had got something. It was just an instant sort of classic, and consequently, it just rocketed to number one and sold 1 million copies. So
So was,
happy
was it
days.
kind of was it did it kind of become immediately obvious that it was going to be the single rather than an
I think that as I say, there were four songs. There was also "Pretty Little Angel Eyes" that came out of there. A little bit of "Soap" was on that
Mm.
that tape as well. I can't think what the other one might have been. But I think that yeah, that there was it might have been a night at Daddy G's actually.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, very successful sort of meeting, and yeah, it became obvious that some of these songs were well worth recording. They'd never been big hits in Europe, so yeah, we recorded them and made a pretty good job of them, and they were massively successful.
Mm. So charts in those days came out on Sundays. I think they still do actually. So there was a chart on Sunday, the 19th of December 76. So that covered the Christmas Day number one. But and unfortunately, despite obviously this success of the song rocketing up the charts, number one for 3 weeks, it was knocked off number one for
Christmas Eve.
the Christmas hit. I guess that's akin to like being top of the table and missing out on promotion on the last the last game of the season, isn't it? Something like that.
As you say, it was the first ever chart they'd done on a Sunday,
Yeah,
and it was also the first ever chart they'd done on Christmas Eve.
yeah.
And they only moved the goalposts at the last minute.
Mm.
And yeah, it would have been nice to have been number one for Christmas. But that said, the icing was to be put on the cake 2 years later when we had the Christmas number one album, which yes, that's most artists would die for the Christmas number one album. There's some huge mega stars that have never achieved that, and to be at number one for Christmas with an album was just, I don't know, the pinnacle of our career, I think.
Mm. So that was the second greatest hits album, wasn't it? The red one. But at the end of 76, you had the first greatest hits, the
Yeah,
blue one. So it's interesting. The band's only been going for, say, professionally for 2 years, but yet you've amassed enough singles in that period to have a greatest hits
yeah,
album.
very different in those days, Paul. Yeah, very, very different. These days, the big artists probably do a single every 18 months.
Mhm.
2 years, some of them, even longer. Some of the bigger stars, but yeah, we would be. We've already recorded what about eight singles, I think, before in 2 years, and there was the greatest hits album, and that was, I think, that got to number three in the chart. Which was amazing to be selling those numbers. And being so successful in the album chart was fantastic.
I was looking, it was actually in the charts for 7 months, which is
Yeah,
unbelievable, really.
yeah, yeah. We had a massive following at that time, and it was a time of our career when we were kind of probably we were maturing, but we were also there was kind of the advent of punk just bubbling under, and I think it kind of made us more middle of the road and more a much more adult audience turn their attentions towards Showaddywaddy and
Yeah.
realize that we were making sort of decent albums and we made some really uplifting records. So yeah, it kind of played into our hands. We matured, and the the audience became more mature, and we were the numbers of records we were selling was astonishing.
Yes, 75, 76 was a funny period in a lot of ways because, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, sort of glam rock was started tailing off really,
Just
75.
about one, yeah.
And, the punk and new wave era, and even the mod revival hadn't really come in by that point. So you had that 75, 76 period where there wasn't really a movement, if you like, of music. So,
Yeah,
but obviously, Showaddywaddy had a big period success
it
in
was
that.
a very hot period for us, and it continues for sort of more than 2 years. We were kind of the number one sort of band for a long, long time. Which was amazing. But consequently, we were still touring sort of here, there, and everywhere, which was it was a really exhausting time because we literally were doing something pretty much every day of our lives that was associated with the band.
Yes, and anybody watching this who looks at the Showaddywaddy website, you just have to look at the gig history that I've pulled together, which lists every gig the band have done from 73, and the dates, the number of dates, it just through the over the
It's
years, it just
incessant. Yeah.
phenomenal, really.
Yeah, it was the energy that we have was beyond belief.
Yeah.
But the boys are still out there doing a lot of dates now, and they're still doing 100 dates a year. But I think for a couple of years, we were up sort of doing nearly 200 dates a year, which was almost madness.
Mm. So
Can't
yeah,
believe I'm
so
still here talking to you after that.
so yeah, Under the Moon of Love and obviously the Greatest Hits album, that single and that album really sort of set the scene really for the next few years. So obviously 77, 78, 79, hugely successful period for the
They
band.
were,
And we can talk about that in the next installment.
yeah, yeah. It was a great period, and also we kind of also the great thing was that we stopped doing the club circuit as well because we kind of grown out of it, if you like, and we had there been arena venues around at that time, which there were very few. I think we probably would have been doing the arenas like a lot
Yeah.
of artists are today, but no, that wasn't to be. But we still did them later on in our career, so it's great to have experienced that as well.
Yeah, indeed. Good stuff. Right then, Dave. So thank you for that. That was really interesting talking
Yeah,
about that particular period.
yeah, great stuff. Well, we'll do it again when some other time and continue onwards further into the career. Delve
Yeah.
into some other interesting stories.
Yes, indeed. Good. Right. Well, thank you for that, Dave. Nice to speak to you again.
Pleasure. And
And
you,
I
Paul.
will see you soon.
Yeah, take care. All
Cheers.
the best. Cheers. Bye bye now. Bye.
Bye.